general view of the film that's returned to one of its main devices. Jeff's account to Anne of his first encounter with Kathy introduces us to that very common noir narrative technique, the flashback voiceover narration. That technique has a special meaning in Out of the Past since it connects up immediately with the themes stressed in the opening scenes. For in films like this, we are both shown events and we're told about them, or we both see what happens and we hear not only characters explaining what they are doing inside the narrative, but we also hear an independent narrative line, and we have been warned in the opening scene explicitly about seeing only what we hear, about believing the narrator. Warned, that is, about the variability of what can be seen, given what we hear or what we believe about what we hear. It's often not clear in voiceovers if we are seeing exactly what we are hearing, everything from the point of view of the narrator, or, as we sometimes are, if we're being allowed to see more of what really happens so that we can appreciate some of the distortion in the narrator's point of view. At least in this case, we're alerted to the difference between what actually happened and the distinct point of view of the participant narrator, alerted to the way the narration and the action can come apart, as it were, if we are sufficiently attentive, but warned by these hearing-seeing references. Another way of stating the problem, often the flashback telling is not so much a perspective on what is shown, but another element of what is being shown. The narration is another event, and so it and the events narrated both require interpreting by us. This, after all, is a story Jeff is telling Anne, not the viewer or an audience in general. There are noir narratives like that. This isn't one. And so it's not surprising that it's a story of a femme fatale of extraordinary powers and ruthless brutality. What's a poor guy like Jeff to do? But the technique also functions in the way it does in many other noirs, and that function is linked to the noir perspective on agency and its many complications. Many commentators have noted that the technique helps emphasize the sense of fatalism and powerlessness. We watch the events unfold as if they were happening in front of us, even though it's already established how they'll turn out. And we have a sense of watching an already determined series simply play out. And the narrator, whose voiceover often has a weary, ironic tone, seems to take the same line. This is the way it happened. I can't change anything now, but I also could not have changed anything then. One can sometimes get the sense that just as the narrator and we are watching an already determined narrative unfold, the narrator feels he was in much the same position as the events actually unfolded, more a spectator than a participant. More generally, the flashback or the flashback position can be said to be required in some philosophical sense, given the way we're shown the action unfolding. Required if we or the characters are to make sense of what happened. That is, contrary to the reflective model, there's very little opportunity for any ex ante deliberation in the scenes we see, and little evidence that responses are the expressions of already deliberated about and resolved general maxims of actions. In the simplest sense, events come at characters much too fast and too confusingly to allow any reflection or reliance on the already reflected. Characters act, often under duress and very quickly and in confusing situations, with little knowledge of what's going on or of other people's motives or understandings, and only then, afterwards, if then, can they reflect on what they did and what it meant. The flashback is a kind of archetypal representation of such unavoidably post facto deliberation. Rather than being able to rely on any ex ante formulated policies, characters can be said to express what turn out to be their actual commitments and aversions in action, and must then retrospectively interpret what that meant, in a sense determine who they were and are. It's of no use to insist that even so, characters can always be said to act in character, out of habituated dispositions that are themselves the result of many prior actions that do reflect some deliberated conclusions. We see far too many characters who act in the heat and confusion of the moment directly counter to what their characters might have led us and them to expect. Edward G. Robinson in Fritz Lang movies, in Scarlet Street and Woman in the Window, for example. There are many others. This belatedness will look like a denial of agency only if we beg the question from the outset and simply assume that agency requires ex ante deliberation and bodily movements caused by relevant psychological states. This flashback position is not the site of mere confabulation, although it is sometimes that. It's often the only position from which agency can be recovered. Or in many other cases, the situations are simply far too novel to fit into any ingrained habits of responsiveness and action. The novelty and extremity of the situation alone makes the reflective model look like too great an idealization. Especially when we consider examples from noirs, the claim by the German social theorist Hans Joas is quite compelling, that we often require another model of action besides the strategic and value-oriented reflective models. We need what Yoas called a creative model of action, not one modeled after reflective deliberation. And noir participants are indeed perhaps best thought of as creatively improvising on the fly, thrusting themselves into the future without benefit of much reliance on reflection in the past in general, much as a painter or a poet will improvise a figure or a line and try to determine afterwards if the improvisation was appropriate. Many of the situations Jeff faces require such immediate creative improvisation. What to do after Kathy suddenly shoots his partner, after he discovers Kathy back at Whit's mansion, after he discovers Whit shot dead, none of which he's reflectively prepared for or has much time, if any, to consider. But the belatedness of reflection in the flashback is also relevant to the most important issue in any account of events that are distinctly actions, the nature of the self-relations involved in intentional deeds, especially what and how I could be said to know about myself when I know what I am about. Now, of course, we know very little psychologically about screen characters we see. We know nothing usually of their childhoods, parents, what they're like in many other contexts, and so forth. They are not real persons, but complex aesthetic objects whose presentation to us is tightly and very narrowly controlled. And all of this is greatly complicated by the fact that they are also recognizable movie stars, playing roles determined by the Hollywood studio system. But in many noirs, the director often goes out of his way to emphasize that in the dimensions relevant to the action we are watching, there is not something missing that we or they could know, but in the strictest sense, there's nothing there to know, at least ex ante. That is, I've suggested that in many noir examples, although there are examples of irrationality, characters are often not deceiving themselves or acting against what they know are in their best interest, although this is not uncommon and it still is puzzling in itself, but they are in some way profoundly opaque to themselves or act without being able to register and respond to what is happening to them. We could say they're not deceiving themselves because they're not yet in any dialogue with themselves at all. This is partly because, given the speed and uniqueness of the situation, they cannot be, or cannot yet be, in such a dialogue. The dizzying speed of events in noirs is something only film can convey fully with such urgency, thanks to the extraordinary directorial control over editing, the length of takes, what information to reveal when, and so forth. And it often dramatically places us in the same position as the film's characters, leading to all the typical sotto voce patter one usually hears underneath noir showings in theaters. Who the hell is that? Wait, I thought she was dead. Are we supposed to know whether he knows? I don't get it. And it's partly that the characters have exactly the same problem. And it's partly because any ex ante formulation